My name is Hannah Monroe, and the day I returned to the US after my husband's funeral in Rome began with a text that chilled me more than the winter wind. Call your own cab, I'm busy. Have you ever longed for your family's embrace at your weakest moment, only to be met with a door slammed shut? My mother always had a reason to be absent on the most important days of my life, and this time was no different. If you've ever felt abandoned right when you needed someone the most, leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe so we can walk through this story together. Because just a few hours later, the whole city would know about the homecoming that nearly cost me my life. I stood frozen outside the airport gate for a long while, the cold from the concrete seeping through my shoes. Around me, people hurried by with their suitcases, calling out and laughing as they reunited with loved ones. All I had was the sound of my own suitcase wheels scraping across the dry, gray floor. On my way to catch a cab, memories from years past slowly came flooding back, vivid down to the smallest detail. I met Daniel on a crisp autumn afternoon at a startup conference in Boston. I was there hoping to find fresh ideas for my fledgling interior design business, while he attended as the youngest keynote speaker, a software engineer recently hailed by a tech magazine as the year's most promising face. We bumped into each other at the buffet coffee station. He accidentally spilled coffee on my sketchbook, the one I used for design ideas. Before I could even find a napkin, he quickly grabbed a clean one from a nearby table, apologizing with a slightly sheepish smile. Let me make it up to you with a fresh cappuccino. And, if you'll allow it, dinner. I laughed, not so much at the invitation itself but at the sincerity, and the hint of nervousness, in his voice. We had dinner that night, and from there our story began. 3 years later, we married in a small, warm ceremony at a little church in New Jersey. No extravagance, no big guest list. Just the people who truly mattered. We bought an old Victorian house with a backyard big enough for me to plant a lavender garden. Daniel would joke that if my lavender plants ever entered a contest, they'd win instantly. He even built me a long table for the porch so I could drink tea and work under the shade of a maple tree in summer. Life after that unfolded like an elegant invitation fate had kindly sent us. Mornings I made breakfast while he read the news. Evenings we cooked together or strolled through the neighborhood. Sometimes we drove to the beach and sat for hours just listening to the waves. We had talked several times about adopting a child. I had even painted an upstairs room a soft shade of blue and placed in it an old rocking chair my mother once used when I was little. Despite my strained relationship with my mother, I thought those keepsakes might give a child some beautiful memories. The opportunity came when Daniel was invited to Rome for 6 months to work on a joint project between his company and a European corporation. It was a golden chance, not just for his career but also for us to live in a city we'd always dreamed of. We planned it carefully. I'd spend the first 3 months there with him, working remotely and exploring Italy. Then return early to prepare our home while he finished the project. The night before we left, we had dinner at home. Candlelight flickered across the table, soft jazz playing in the background. Daniel held my hand, his voice steady. 6 months, and then we'll start a new chapter. I don't want that blue room to be just an office anymore. I understood, and my heart tightened with happiness. But a week before the trip, my mother called. Her tone was flat, emotionless. If anything happens over there, you'll have to handle it yourself. Don't bother anyone. I laughed, thinking she was joking. Sure, Mum. I know. I didn't realize that sentence would become the coldest truth of my life. Our days in Rome were beautiful. Mornings we had croissants at the corner cafe. Daniel went to work while I wandered cobblestone streets, picking up fresh fruit from the market. On weekends, he took me to see grand piazzas, ancient churches, or simply to sit along the Tiber River at sunset. I remember one drizzly afternoon when we sheltered under the awning of a gelato shop, sharing a cup of lemon gelato. Daniel said, "I think Rome suits you. You smile more here." I just leaned my head on his shoulder, feeling like everything in the world could wait, as long as this moment lasted. But life never tells you when the storm will come. One April morning, as I was making coffee in our rented apartment, my phone rang. Daniel was on a video call from his office, saying he had a headache. Probably stress. I'll take something and keep working. He smiled reassuringly. I believed him. Less than 8 hours later, one of his colleagues called again. His voice panicked, sirens wailing in the background. Daniel, collapsed, hospital. I dropped everything and rushed to the hospital. The hallways smelled sharply of antiseptic, the white lights glaring. The doctor said Daniel had suffered a severe brain hemorrhage, was in a coma, and needed emergency surgery. I sat outside the operating room, hands trembling, heart pounding. The surgery dragged on, but it was in vain. The damage was too extensive. His chances of waking up were almost none. I stayed by his side for 4 days, reading him old letters, recounting our memories, praying until my voice gave out. He never opened his eyes again. I called my mother, my voice barely a whisper. Mom. Daniel. She was silent for a moment, then said, I know you're sad, but plane tickets are expensive. Melissa and I can't come. My sister cut in. Just handle it there and come home. Being alone there isn't safe. Unsafe. Unsafe was this. Standing in a foreign city, stripped of the person I loved most, with no one to turn to. The funeral took place in a small cemetery on the outskirts of Rome. The sky was gray, light rain falling. No one from my family came. Only a few of Daniel's colleagues, a neighbor we'd spoken to a couple of times, and an elderly priest. As the casket was lowered, I felt like I was falling into the same dark, endless space. Afterward, I had to run from office to office, completing death certificates and insurance paperwork. Language was a constant hurdle. I learned to say simple phrases through a translation app, forcing a smile even when I felt hollow inside. Phone calls home grew shorter. My mother asked only, Did you buy travel insurance? Melissa said, You should hire someone there to handle things and get back to the US soon. No one asked if I was eating, sleeping, or surviving. On my last night in Rome, I stood alone at Daniel's grave, placing a bouquet of lavender I'd found in a market stall. I'll carry you in my heart, Dan. Always. Dragging my suitcase to the airport, I felt like a defeated soldier. Having lost the man I loved and the feeling of having a place to return to. And perhaps this was only the beginning of the story. Share if you've ever felt loss and loneliness so deep it swallowed you whole, so I'll know I'm not alone. The flight home felt endless. I changed planes in Munich, then waited for hours in Toronto due to bad weather. Sitting in the lounge, staring at the rain-soaked runway, my mind replayed those final moments with Daniel. 4 days at his bedside. His hand growing colder in mine, the steady beeping of the heart monitor, until it stopped. The doctor lowered his head and offered condolences in English. His voice carrying that deep, somber Italian accent, but I could barely hear him. It was as if all sound had been sucked into the hollow space inside me. I had thought at the very least I would have family by my side in that moment. But no. When I called my mother to break the news, I can still remember her flat, almost transactional tone, as if we were discussing a grocery list. I know you're sad, but plane tickets are really expensive right now. Besides, both my and Melissa's schedules are full. My sister added, Just finish everything there and come home. Don't stay too long, it's dangerous to be alone. I gripped my phone tightly, fighting to keep my voice from cracking. Dangerous. Dangerous is standing alone in that cold hospital room, watching the person you love most slip further and further out of reach, knowing no one from home will walk through the door to hold you. The funeral in Rome was heartbreakingly simple. The small cemetery sat on a hill in the outskirts, the sky that day heavy and gray, the wind carrying dampness from the sea. I placed lavender, just like the kind I grew in our yard, on top of the casket, as the priest's Latin words echoed steadily. Daniel's co-workers and a few neighbors I'd only recently met were the only ones standing with me. Not a single familiar face from my family appeared. After everyone left, I stayed there, my hand resting on the dark wooden lid, as if I could somehow hold onto the last bit of warmth. Then, without warning, rain began to pour. Cold, sharp, but I didn't move. Through the sound of the rain, I whispered, "I'm sorry I let you go alone." The days that followed are ones I'll never forget. I ran all over the city, moving between different Italian government offices to complete paperwork. Death certificate, hospital confirmation, insurance claims. Each form required signatures and stamps from different places. I spent hours waiting in noisy corridors, using a translation app to try to understand long, complicated instructions. One morning, while waiting in line at the municipal office, I got a text from my mother. "Did you buy travel insurance? If not, the cost of transporting the body back will be very high." I stared at the screen. Not a single question about how I was holding up, not one word of comfort. Just money, costs, and if not, then. Melissa video called me that evening, not to check on me but to say, "You should hire someone to handle things there. Just come back to the States soon." I explained as calmly as I could, "Daniel has no one here but me. I can't just leave him." She sighed, as if I was making trouble for myself. The cost of transporting his body back to the US was far beyond my means, even after counting my savings. Daniel's international health insurance didn't cover it all. I had no choice but to bury him in Rome, the city where he'd spent his final months living and working. That decision still haunts me, but I knew I had no other option. After the funeral, I returned to the apartment we had rented, where everything still bore his presence. His book left open on the table, his coat draped over a chair, the faint scent of his cologne still lingering in the air. I folded his clothes, placing them in my suitcase along with keepsakes. The watch I'd given him on our 5th anniversary, the ceramic mug he used every morning, our beach photo album. On my last night in Rome, I visited the cemetery again. At dawn, mist covered the hill, birdsong carrying through the stillness. I sat on the damp grass, my hand on the cold gravestone, telling him about my upcoming flight, about the empty house in New Jersey, and about my fear of walking through that door alone. When the plane lifted off from Rome, I looked out the window and saw the city growing smaller, fading into white clouds. I told myself, once I get home, things will get better. But I didn't know that home was no longer the safe place I thought it was. The flight took longer than expected because of a storm over the Atlantic. We landed in Toronto 3 hours late, making me miss my connecting flight to Newark. The next available flight wasn't until the next morning. I booked a room at the airport hotel, lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the air conditioner. My eyes closed, but my mind kept replaying the hospital, the funeral, and those cold messages from my mother and Melissa. When I finally set foot in Newark, I was beyond exhausted. I took out my phone and sent a message to our family group chat, landing at 5 p.m. "Can anyone pick me up?" Melissa replied almost instantly, "I'm in a meeting. Just grab a taxi." A few minutes later, my mother added, "You should have told us sooner. No one's free right now." I stood frozen in the middle of the crowd hurrying out of the airport. Their answers didn't surprise me, but still cut like a knife into an already open wound. I pulled my suitcase toward the taxi stand, giving the driver my address in a hoarse voice, worn out from both fatigue and holding everything in. Through the taxi window, I watched the familiar streets of New Jersey pass by. Everything outside looked the same, but inside me it all felt foreign, hard to explain. I realized I'd probably been handling everything on my own for a long time. This time it was just more painfully obvious. If you've ever thought you'd hit rock bottom, keep listening, because what waited for me at home was far harsher. Like and subscribe so you can follow me into the next part of the story. The taxi stopped in front of the house Daniel and I once called our home. From the outside, everything looked familiar. White painted wooden fence, lavender bushes by the porch, the dark green front door. But as I stepped onto the porch, an odd unease crept in. The front lock had fresh scratches, as if someone had tried to force it open. I turned the key, and the door swung wide, releasing a rush of icy air. The house was pitch dark, unnervingly quiet. I set my suitcase down and reached for the light switch. Nothing. I tried again, still no electricity. The musty smell rising from the wood floors hit me. I walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge. Inside were only old jars of spices, a few expired packages, and a plastic container blooming with green mold. The once warm kitchen now looked abandoned. I circled into the living room. The sofa was covered with a thin layer of dust. The coffee table had several faint circular stains, rings left by glasses without coasters. On the bookshelf, several of my books were gone, replaced with a stack of Melissa's fashion magazines. I climbed the stairs slowly. Passing the hallway, I stopped in front of my office door. A paper note written in marker was taped to the knob. "Do not enter. Borrowed temporarily." A wave of anger surged through me. Open the door. The sight stopped me cold. Most of my things, design files, computer, keepsake boxes, had been shoved into a corner, covered with a thin sheet. In their place stood a brand new queen bed. Melissa's clothes filled the closet, and the vanity table was crowded with makeup and perfume. In the corner, a man's suitcase lay half open, filled with clothes belonging to someone I'd never met. I walked downstairs, gripping my phone, about to call Melissa, when I froze in front of the basement door. A heavy damp smell seeped out. The door was unlocked. I flipped the stairwell light, flickered, then went out completely. I stepped down carefully, using my phone's flashlight. Water pooled almost to my ankles. From the corner came the steady dripping sound. The main water pipe had burst, spraying a thin jet across the floor. The cold from the concrete seeped into my bones. On the other side of the basement, the breaker box was damp, with several black scorch marks around the outlet. Instinct told me not to touch it, but the skin-biting cold made me want to turn on the heat. I stepped closer, holding a small wooden stick, ready to try flipping the switch, when a sudden spark flashed. A small pop echoed, followed by a sharp burst of light. I jumped back, heart pounding. Cold water splashed against my face. My breath came fast as I realized. Just a little closer and I could have been electrocuted. I hurried upstairs, slamming the basement door shut. My shirt clung to my back, soaked through, my hands trembling. I collapsed into a kitchen chair, caught between fury and exhaustion. After all those months in Rome, I thought coming home would bring peace. But this house now felt more like a dangerous stranger than a refuge. My phone buzzed. A text from Melissa. "I'm borrowing your room for a while, hope you understand. My place is under renovation. My boyfriend's staying too." I bit my lip until I tasted blood. No asking in advance. No checking to see if I'd even made it home or needed anything. Just a casual announcement that she'd claimed my room, as if I were a guest in my own house. Called her. She picked up right away, voice calm. "Oh, you're back. Do you have any idea what I just walked into? Yeah, it might be a little messy, but I needed a place fast. Renovations are a pain, you know. And the basement. The pipes burst, the power shorting out. I almost got electrocuted." She was silent for a few seconds, then let out a small laugh. "Probably just the weather. Call a repairman." Her indifference was like another layer of ice over my chest. I sat alone in the living room, pale daylight seeping through the curtains. Every detail in the house seemed to be telling me a story I didn't want to hear. The cold kitchen, the empty fridge, my workroom taken over, the basement broken and flooded. I realized it wasn't just Daniel who was gone. My sense of home had vanished too. If you've ever opened the door to a place that used to be your haven, only to find it no longer belongs to you, you'd understand the hollow chill filling my heart in that moment. Leave a comment and share. I want to know I'm not the only one who's ever felt this way. I was still sitting in the kitchen chair, water dripping from my hair onto the cold floor. The damp clung to my skin, making me shiver, not from the temperature, but from the emptiness spreading inside my chest. The home Daniel and I had built together now felt like an abandoned building, occupied, violated, and rotting from the inside out. I knew I should change clothes, but something pulled me back toward the basement. Part of me feared the damage would get worse. Part of me wanted to see for myself if there was anything else waiting to go wrong. I grabbed a small flashlight and opened the basement door again. A thick wave of damp air rolled up, the smell of rust and standing water hitting my nose. The flashlight beam swept across the walls, catching yellow stains bleeding into the paint. The water had risen higher, at least to my ankles now. Drops fell steadily from the broken pipe, the sound echoing in the closed space. I stepped onto the first stair, then the second. The moment my foot touched the water, a biting chill cut into my skin. I'd only taken a few steps when I heard a faint click from the breaker box, like metal snapping together. My instincts told me to stop, but then a blue flash sparked in the corner. Before I could react, something slammed into me, a force throwing me backward. I crashed hard onto the wooden steps, my back hitting with a sharp crack. My vision went black around the edges, a high ringing filling my ears. My whole body tingled, my right hand burning like it had been seared. When I opened my eyes, I was lying flat, my lower half still wet. My breath came in ragged bursts. I touched my head. My fingertips came away wet and warm. The flashlight had rolled away, its beam catching a dark, slow drip of blood from my hand. I forced myself up, each step toward the stairs heavier than the last. My heart pounded, breath quick and shallow, but my mind repeated one thought: get out of here. In the kitchen, I dropped into a chair, pressing my palm to my forehead, blood still seeping. My right hand throbbed with every movement. I thought of calling for help, but then remembered my phone was in the living room. I staggered toward it, muttering to myself, just get the phone, just call someone. But the moment my fingers brushed the table, dizziness crashed over me. The walls and ceiling spun. My eyes blurred. I leaned hard against the couch, fighting to stay upright. Outside, wind howled through the cracks, hinting at an oncoming snowstorm. I forced myself to the couch, wrapping a thin blanket around me. But the cold still seeped into my bones. My fingers numbed, my breathing became uneven. Then a piercing sound cut through the stillness, the alarm. At first I thought it was the smoke detector, but there was no smell of fire. I realized with a sinking heart, it was the carbon monoxide alarm. The chimney or heating system must have failed. I turned my head toward the phone on the table, less than 2 feet away, but my body wouldn't respond. Every movement felt like being buried under hundreds of pounds of stone. The cold and a strange drowsiness pulled me down into the dark. In that haze, Daniel's face appeared, clear, gentle like always. I thought I heard him say, "Hannah, don't give up." But my eyelids were too heavy, and I let myself slip into the shadows. A pounding on the door shattered the quiet, followed by a voice shouting, "Hannah, is anyone in there?" The voice echoed, faded. And then everything went silent. When I woke again, a white hospital ceiling loomed above me. The smell of disinfectant mixed with the plastic scent of an oxygen tube. A woman's voice said, "She's awake." I turned my head to see a woman with graying hair, wearing a name tag that read Diane Foster. She took my hand and said, "I'm your neighbor across the street. I saw water coming out from under your door and got worried. When I heard the alarm, I called 911. I blinked, piecing the memory together. Diane continued, "They found you unconscious on the couch. Both the carbon monoxide and the low temperature were dangerous. Just a little later and a shiver ran through me. I thought of those hours before, alone, freezing, with the basement flooded, the electricity sparking, and poison gas leaking into the air. And most of all, no one from my own family there to even check if I'd made it home safely. When the nurse left, Diane stayed a few more minutes. She placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You're lucky, Hannah. But no one should have to go through something like this alone." I wanted to say, "I'm not really alone, I have family," but the words stuck in my throat. Because the truth was, I was completely alone. And that hurt more than any injury I had on my body right now. Out in the hallway, the steady sound of medical staff's footsteps echoed. A few people glanced at me with an expression that was part sympathy, and part as if they already knew my story. I didn't understand why until a young reporter stepped in, asking if he could talk. He introduced himself as Michael, from the local news station. "I was covering storm-related accidents when I heard about your case. A woman who just lost her husband came home, then suffered a serious accident, and nearly died. A lot of people are interested in your story." Before I could respond, he held out his phone, showing a social media post. A photo of the ambulance in front of my house, with the caption, "Survivor left alone in a snowstorm." I stared at the screen, feeling both unsettled and empty. I didn't know then that from this moment on, none of it would remain private. And those I thought would stay silent would soon show up. Before I could answer Michael, the hospital room door swung open. My mother walked in first, followed by Melissa and my father. No one knocked. No one asked if I was ready to see them. They just came in like it was a space they automatically had the right to enter. Melissa's eyes swept the room, pausing briefly on me before shifting away. She turned to my mother and murmured, "It's exactly like on TV. They even filmed the ambulance." My mother barely looked at me. She moved closer, her voice half scolding, half defensive. "They're reporting it wrong, making it seem like we abandoned you. You have to clear this up before people get the wrong idea." My father stood in the corner, hands in his pockets, silent. Now and then he glanced at me quickly, then looked away. I leaned back against the pillow, keeping my voice steady. "What exactly is wrong in their report, Mom?" She froze, clearly not expecting me to ask so directly. "Well, how could we have known your house was like that? If we had known, of course I would have done something." I looked her in the eyes. "You knew I'd just lost my husband. You knew I was coming home after a 30-hour flight. You got my message from the airport. And you told me to call a taxi." Her lips tightened, avoiding my gaze. Melissa cut in lightly. "I was in a meeting, you know. I couldn't just walk out." "And Mom, you were busy." "Yes. I had plans with friends," she said, as if that were a valid excuse. In that moment, I realized they hadn't come here out of concern for me. They came because they were worried about their image. Michael was still by the door, quietly observing. Seeing the tension, he asked softly, "Should I step outside so your family can talk privately?" I shook my head. "No need. This is the truth. And if you want to hear the full story, then both you and they should stay." My mother turned to me, her tone sharper. "Are you trying to shame this family in front of an outsider?" "I'm trying to make sure no one thinks I'm making things up," I said, my voice calm and deliberate. Melissa crossed her arms, leaning against the wall with a faint smirk. "You always make such a big deal out of everything." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. My mind flashed through every time they couldn't be there for me. My college graduation, my wedding, the day Daniel was admitted to the hospital. Every time they had a reason, and I always told myself to understand. But now, after everything, I couldn't keep making excuses for them. When Daniel was dying, Mom said plane tickets were too expensive. At the funeral, no one from the family came. When I texted from the airport, you told me to call a taxi, and Mom said no one was available. When I nearly died in my own house from cold and carbon monoxide, all you worried about was people misunderstanding on TV. Tell me honestly, when does my safety come before this family's pride? No one answered. Only the steady beeping of the heart monitor filled the silence. My father spoke for the first time since arriving. Hannah, I understand you're emotional, but sometimes you need to see things from other perspectives. I turned to him, my voice low. You're right. I've seen things from your perspectives for 34 years. I've accepted your absence at the most important moments of my life, believing that if I was patient, someday you'd put me first. But clearly I was wrong. My mother shot Michael a warning glance, as if to make him stop taking notes. But Michael simply said gently, "This is her choice. I'll only write what she wants to share." Melissa frowned. So what do you want now? For us to get on our knees and apologize in front of the whole city? No, I said instantly. I want you to actually acknowledge what happened, instead of running from it. My mother shrugged, sighing. Every family gets busy sometimes. No one can drop everything just because one member's having a hard time. I smiled, but it was bitter. You're right, not everyone can drop everything. But not everyone sees picking up their daughter from the airport after she's buried her husband as dropping everything. A heavy silence followed. My father cleared his throat, as if to break the tension. Melissa glanced at her watch. All right, get some rest. We'll talk later. They began gathering their bags, ready to leave. But I knew that if I didn't speak now, I'd fall back into silence like every time before. Wait, I said firmly. This time we're finishing the conversation. I don't want any more misunderstandings. My mother stopped at the door, looking back at me. In her eyes I saw no regret, only defense. If you still think I'm overreacting, then just say so. But don't pretend we're still a close family. I nearly lost my life in my own home, and when I woke up, the first thing I saw wasn't my family. It was a camera light. Michael lowered his recorder, but I went on. This isn't a story to save anyone's reputation. This is a story about truth, and about what it feels like to be abandoned when you need someone the most. And if anyone hears it and decides to rethink how they treat their loved ones, then that's even better. I turned to Michael. You can quote me on this. It's not blood that decides who will stand by you in your hardest moments, but who truly chooses to stay. He nodded, his eyes filled with respect. If you've ever had that moment when the person you counted on most didn't show up, leave a comment or share your story. I want to know I'm not the only one who's felt this way. After my mother, Melissa, and father left, the hospital room grew quiet again. Only the sound of the heart monitor and the wind slipping through the window crack remained. I leaned my head against the pillow, closed my eyes, and let the exhaustion wash over me. But mingled in with it was a strange sense of relief, like a door inside me had finally closed, blocking the path I'd been trying to walk for years, even though I knew it led nowhere. A little later, Jessica, the nurse who'd cared for me all morning, returned. She carried a tray of medication and a gentle smile. "Feeling any better?" she asked. "A little," I rasped. "Maybe. Not in my body, but in my mind." Jessica sat in the chair by my bed, resting a hand on the bed frame. "I overheard what happened earlier. Not everyone has the courage to say everything in front of their family, especially in a situation like this." I gave a faint smile. "Honestly, I just didn't want to have to repeat it ever again." She nodded, then reached into her bag and took out a sheet of paper. "This is from the hospital's social worker. The local community has reached out. They want to help while you recover. The Riverview Hotel is ready to let you stay there temporarily, free of charge, while your house is being repaired. They've also teamed up with a volunteer group to help get you essential items and provide rides to your follow-up appointments." I stared at the paper, unable to speak right away. Something caught in my throat. These people, most of them strangers, had thought more about me than my own blood relatives. Jessica went on. They'll also help contact your insurance company and coordinate with repair services. I've spoken to Diane. She said she'll visit regularly if you're okay with it. Hearing Diane's name brought back the memory of her holding my hand in the ER. Her worried eyes as she told me how she'd found me. A neighbor I'd only known for less than a year, yet the only one who rang the bell and called for help. I gave a small nod. I'd like that. When Jessica left, I took out my phone. My inbox held several messages from unfamiliar names. Neighbors, friends of Daniel's, even a few former clients. They sent wishes for a quick recovery, offers to help, or simply, "If you need someone to talk to, I'm here." I replied to each one, feeling as if I were slowly being pulled out of the dense darkness of the past days. That afternoon, the social worker, Ms. Patel, arrived. She was around 40 with a calm, steady voice. "Everything's arranged. Tomorrow, when you're discharged, a car will take you and your belongings to Riverview. The room is ready. It has a small kitchen and a new bed. And my house." Yes. "The repair company will start as soon as the weather allows. I've also arranged for a cleaning crew to handle the basement and inspect the electrical and heating systems." I was quiet for a few seconds, then said, "Thank you. I don't know what else to say." "You don't need to say anything," Patel smiled. "Just allow yourself to accept the help." Her words echoed in my mind. I realized I'd always thought of accepting help as a burden, or a debt I'd have to repay. But these people were offering the kind of support that asked for nothing except my permission to let them give it. The next day, I left the hospital in crisp, cool weather. The volunteer group's SUV was already waiting outside, its trunk holding a few bags of my clothes and personal items. Diane stood there, bundled in a thick cardigan, holding a thermos. "Hot coffee. I thought you might need it." I took it, warmth flooding me from more than just the heat. "Thank you, Diane." Riverview sat by the river, only about a 10-minute drive from my house. When I stepped into the room, I saw a bed with fresh white sheets, a small kitchen counter with a kettle and a few packets of tea, a fridge stocked with basic groceries. On the table by the window sat a small lavender plant, with a note beneath it. "Welcome to your temporary home." I set my suitcase down and lightly touched the lavender leaves. The scent always reminded me of Daniel, but today, instead of tightening my chest, it soothed something inside me. That evening, as I was unpacking, I heard a knock on the door. It was June, the hotel owner. She was around 60, with short silver hair and a kind smile. "I heard about what happened. If you need anything, just knock on my door. I lost my husband too, so I understand a little of what you're feeling." We talked for nearly an hour. She told me about the days after her husband died, and how an old group of friends had stepped in to help her. That experience had inspired her to help others in turn. In the days that followed, I began to settle into a new rhythm. Every morning, Diane stopped by to take me to appointments or pick up groceries. In the afternoons, the volunteer team came to discuss repairs, take photos of the damage, and make a replacement list. In the evenings, I often sat by the window, looking at the river, sipping tea, and writing everything down in my journal. One day, I got a text from Melissa. "Heard you're staying at a hotel. Let me know when the house is fixed." No inquiry about my health, no apology. I read it, set the phone down, and didn't respond. The distance between me and my family no longer scared me. Instead, it felt freeing, like I could finally breathe in a room no longer filled with smoke. One afternoon, as the volunteer team was packing up to leave, a man named Carl, an electrician, said to me, "You know, when we first got the call about your house, a lot of folks figured it'd be tough to work with the owner. Homeowners can be pretty tense. But you were different. You listened, asked good questions, trusted us. That's rare." I smiled, really smiled, for the first time in weeks. Maybe it's because I've been too tired to do everything on my own anymore. Carl patted my shoulder. Sometimes letting people help is its own kind of strength. That night, as I closed the window and turned off the lights, I thought about Carl's words, Diane's warm eyes, and the little lavender pot sitting neatly on the table. Maybe this was the beginning of a different kind of family, a kind I never knew I could find. One Monday morning, as I sat at the table by the window of my room at the Riverview Hotel, I decided to finally sort through my papers. Since I'd been discharged from the hospital, I hadn't really touched the boxes of documents I'd brought from the house. They sat neatly stacked in the corner, but every time I looked at them, a heaviness settled in my chest, like they were filled with things I wasn't ready to face. I brewed a pot of tea, pulled out a chair, and opened the first box. Inside were bills, insurance contracts, bank statements, and a few unopened envelopes. I began sorting, intending to toss out anything no longer valid. Then a dark blue folder caught my eye. It wasn't mine. When I opened it, I immediately saw the name on the account holder. Melissa Monroe. My brow furrowed as I flipped through the pages. Signatures, authorizations, and then a homeowner's insurance policy. My heart began to race as I read more closely. In the primary beneficiaries section, my name had been crossed out and replaced with Melissa's, the change stamped and confirmed by the insurance company. The amendment date was just over 2 months ago, when I was still in Rome. I leaned back in my chair, my hands trembling slightly. The only question in my mind: how could she have the authority to change a policy where I was the primary holder? I kept turning the pages and found an attached document, an authorization form bearing my signature. But I knew instantly it wasn't mine. A chill crept from the base of my neck down my spine. Someone had forged my name to transfer the policy to Melissa. I called the insurance company immediately. A woman's voice answered after a few beeps. "Hello, this is customer service. How can I help you today?" "I need to verify a change to my homeowner's insurance policy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Please give me your full name and policy number." I read off the information. A few minutes later, she confirmed that the policy had been changed at the request of the account holder, through an authorization document sent from my home address. When I asked who had submitted it, she replied, "It was submitted by a family representative. We have a copy of the ID. It belongs to your sister." I sat frozen. Everything began clicking into place. Melissa's uninvited borrowing of my room, the changes in the house, my mother's coldness, and the unease that had been gnawing at me since I got back. I called Daniel's attorney Mr. Harris, the one who'd helped us with our will and other legal documents. As I explained what I'd found, his voice grew grave. "Hannah, this is signature forgery and shows signs of property misappropriation. We need to act immediately. I'll arrange to meet you in person and review all the documents." That afternoon, I brought the entire folder and the unopened envelopes to his office. He sat behind his large wooden desk, glasses low on his nose, reading each page carefully. When he opened an envelope stamped from the bank, he frowned. "Were you aware of this secondary mortgage?" he asked. "What mortgage? I've never. This is a lien on the house for $40,000, in your name and Melissa's." Felt like someone had just slapped me across the face. Not only had the insurance policy been altered, but my house had been used as collateral for a loan. Mr. Harris looked up. "We need to contact the bank immediately and report this. I'll also file for a temporary order to freeze any transactions involving this property." I nodded, but my mind kept circling one question. What did Melissa need that money for? 2 days later, the answer came sooner than expected. Carl, the electrician working on my house, called to say he'd just seen Melissa with a man he didn't recognize near the property. They were loading large cardboard boxes into a truck from my house. I asked Carl to take pictures from a distance. When the photos came through, I recognized the man's face. Not a friend or colleague of Melissa's, but someone who'd been arrested before for trafficking illegal goods in the area. In one shot, a box lid had popped open, revealing electronics and luxury watches. I sent all the evidence to Mr. Harris and contacted the police. They immediately opened an investigation, suspecting my home was being used to store illicit items. That night, I lay awake, listening to the river wind whisper outside the window. I thought of Daniel. He'd always believed I was strong enough to protect myself, but I'd never imagined I'd have to protect our home from someone in my own family. The next morning, the police reached out, asking me to help them set up a sting. The idea filled me with both fear and a fierce resolve. If this worked, I could reclaim full ownership and end this chain of violations once and for all. If you've ever uncovered a shocking truth about your own family, you'll understand the mix of hurt and anger coursing through me right now. Like and subscribe to follow along, because what happens next you won't want to miss. I sat in my Riverview hotel room, staring at my laptop screen. On it was the plan the police had sent me, detailing every step to lure Melissa and her boyfriend back to the house with the contraband, so they could be caught red-handed. The feeling was both strange and suffocating. I'd never imagined I'd one day be setting a trap with law enforcement for my own blood. But if I didn't, I'd be living in fear forever, and the house, the last piece of Daniel's legacy, would keep being used for something illegal. The closed-door meeting at the station took place that afternoon. Detective Wilson, the lead on the case, spread a map of my house across the table. We'll station 4 officers, 2 upstairs, 1 in the basement, 1 outside the back door. You'll invite Melissa and her boyfriend over to discuss getting your office back. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I just talk to them like normal, right? Exactly. Once they start moving the boxes, we'll move in. You don't need to intervene. Mr. Harris was there too, sitting beside me. He placed a hand on the folder of documents. Hannah, your safety is the top priority. If things get tense, get outside immediately. I gave a small smile, even as anxiety swelled inside me. I understand. I'll follow the plan. The next morning I called Melissa. Her voice on the phone was as casual as ever, as if nothing had happened. What's up, Hannah? Can you come to the house this afternoon? I want to talk about the office. And some paperwork. There was a short pause before she replied. Sure. He's coming too. That one sentence confirmed it. The boyfriend would be there, just as the police had predicted. I arrived at the house an hour before the meeting time, along with Detective Wilson and his team. They took their positions, checked their radios, and reminded me once more. When we hear you say now, we'll know it's time. The house was silent, but I could feel the presence of people in every corner. It was like standing in the calm right before a storm breaks. The sound of a truck stopping in front of the gate signaled that the moment had arrived. Melissa walked in first, wearing a long coat, followed by a burly man whose shifty eyes scanned the house like he was checking the layout. What do you want to talk about? Melissa asked as she pulled off her gloves. I pointed toward the office. We need to clear this out. I want my room back, and there are some papers that... Melissa cut me off, her tone impatient. Hannah, I told you I was just borrowing it. There's no need to make this a big deal. But the man wasn't paying attention to our conversation. He walked quickly over to the stack of cardboard boxes in the corner, opened one, and started rearranging the contents. Melissa glanced at him, gave a small nod, then turned back to me. If you need the room, I'll clear it, but these things need to go now. They began carrying boxes toward the back door. I took a step back, my heartbeat pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was it. I touched my ear lightly where the tiny microphone was clipped and said, "Now." Within seconds, the sound of rushing footsteps filled the air. The back door burst open, and 2 officers swarmed in to restrain the man, reading him his rights. Melissa froze, backing against the wall as two female officers approached. Melissa Monroe, you're under arrest for suspected forgery, property theft, and aiding in the possession of illegal goods. You have the right to remain silent. What? This is my house. Melissa screamed, glaring at me. Hannah, what the hell are you doing? I took a deep breath, keeping my voice steady. I'm protecting what's mine, and protecting Daniel's memory. Melissa was led away in handcuffs, still hurling insults. Her boyfriend was also escorted out, his face twisted with rage. Both were loaded into the patrol car waiting at the gate. Detective Wilson stepped over and put a hand on my shoulder. Good job. Thanks to your cooperation, we have enough evidence to press charges. I only nodded, my eyes following the car as it pulled away. There was no sense of victory, just an emptiness. As much as Melissa had betrayed me, seeing my own sister in handcuffs left a wound that wouldn't heal easily. Mr. Harris came over, his voice calm but firm. From this moment on, this house is entirely yours. And we'll move forward with seeking restitution from both the insurance company and the bank. I looked around the house. The musty, cold smell still lingered, but I knew that at least from today, it would no longer be a place for dark things to hide. It was mine again, and Daniel's. That evening, back at the Riverview, I stood for a long time at my window. City lights reflected on the river's surface, glittering like fallen stars. I missed Daniel more than ever. If he were alive, we'd probably be sitting on the porch, drinking coffee, talking about the spring garden. But I also knew that if he were here, he'd smile and say, I'm proud of you, Hannah. You stood your ground, even when the hardest fight came from those you once trusted most. I closed the curtains, feeling more at peace than I had in months. This fight hadn't just been about reclaiming property. It was about reclaiming my voice, my dignity, and my right to steer my own life. I returned to the lake house after nearly 3 weeks of non-stop paperwork, hearings, and meetings with lawyers. This time, walking in, I no longer felt the eyes of strangers or the creeping cold from the dark corners. Instead, the house opened its arms to welcome me home. On the first morning, I stood on the porch, holding a steaming mug of coffee, the mist fogging the glass in front of me. The spring lake lay calm, the water a deep shade of blue, and the willow trees in the yard swayed gently in the breeze. I closed my eyes, hearing the birdsong, and imagined Daniel standing beside me, also holding a coffee, smiling. I told you this is where you belong. After the police completed their inspection, I hired a professional cleaning crew. Everything connected to Melissa and her boyfriend was removed, from the filthy boxes to the scratches on the walls. The office, where I had first found the incriminating document, was repainted a soft beige and restored with Daniel's old wooden desk. I placed our wedding photo in a polished silver frame on top, so every time I sat down to work, I'd see his smile. One afternoon I got a call from Mr. Harris. Hannah, the bank has agreed to refund the money Melissa borrowed with forged documents. The insurance payout has also been approved. You'll have the full amount within 2 weeks. I went quiet. Not because of the money, though it was significant, but because for the first time in months, it felt like everything was finally being set right. Thank you, Mr. Harris. Without you, I don't know what I would have done. I just did what needed to be done. But Hannah, I have to say, the way you faced all of this, that's what made you win. That evening I stepped into the backyard. The warm porch light shone over the damp garden beds. I remembered how Daniel had wanted to plant lavender along the path. This year I decided I would do it. The next day, I drove into town to buy seeds and tools. The shop owner, Mrs. Linda, recognized me instantly. You're the one who just got the lake house back, aren't you? The whole town's talking about it. I smiled softly. Yes, I guess that's me. I'm happy for you. We need more people who'll stand up for what's right. Words like that made me realize I hadn't just been defending the house for myself. My story had spread, becoming a reminder that no one should stay silent when they've been wronged. A week later, once the bank and insurance transfers were complete, I met with my attorney to sign the final documents. Leaving his office, I stopped by a small coffee shop. The young barista set a latte in front of me and whispered, "I followed your hearing. You're the reason I decided to study law. I want to help people like you." I didn't know what to say except, "Thank you," but inside, my heart warmed in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. In the days that followed, I focused on restoring the house. I planted new tulips and lavender in the front yard, replaced the kitchen cabinets with lighter wood, and added a pair of soft armchairs to the living room. I didn't change too much, just enough so the space reflected who I was and what Daniel had left behind. One weekend morning, I invited a few close neighbors for lunch. They brought dishes, stories, and laughter. No one said much about Melissa, but I knew they understood. We talked about the lake, the coming summer, and the evening boat rides we'd take at sunset. When everyone had left, I stood alone on the porch, watching the lake shimmer under the fading afternoon light. I thought about the road I had traveled, from the day I returned in the bitter cold and was left standing at the airport, to the moment I saw my sister led away in handcuffs. Every step had been heavy, but each one had brought me here, to a peaceful place that belonged to me. I knew there would still be hard days ahead, memories that wouldn't be easy to forget. But I also knew I was strong enough to face them all. Not just because I had to protect myself, but because Daniel would always want to see me keep living, keep loving, and keep the fire in this home burning bright. And so, when night fell, I turned on the porch light, letting its warm golden glow spill across the road out front, as a greeting to anyone passing by, and as a reminder to myself, I have returned and I am here to stay. Perhaps everyone who hears this story will feel something different. Some might see it as a journey to reclaim justice, others might recognize the power of setting boundaries even with family, and some may ask themselves, if it were me, would I have the courage to do the same? I truly want to hear your thoughts about family, about choices, and about how we protect what is ours. Family life is full of ties that are both warm and complicated. Sometimes those very bonds make it hard to make the right decision. But I believe that when we hold on to integrity and determination, we will find peace again, no matter what we have to sacrifice. If you want to keep hearing heartfelt, meaningful stories about family, about conflicts, and about the lessons we find in everyday life, follow the channel so you won't miss any of the stories to come. I believe there will be many more that will touch your heart.